If you ever fly as a passenger on the airlines, you may be interested in what Carl Valeri has to say about the dynamics currently affecting that industry. And if it's ever crossed your mind that you might like to be an airline pilot, you'll definitely want to hear what he has to say about the current state of pilot hiring at the majors, cargo, and regional airlines. So stick around. Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk general aviation. My name is Max Trescott. I've been flying for 50 years. I'm the author of several books and the 2008 National Flight Instructor of the Year. And my mission is to help you become the safest possible pilot. Last week in episode 339, we talked about the new Skyrise 1 helicopter, which is based on a Robinson R66 that replaces traditional helicopter controls with just a single stick. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out at aviationnewstalk.com/339. And if this is the first time you've heard this show, welcome. So glad that you found us. And so that you find us again next week, take a moment right now on whatever app you're using and touch either the subscribe key, or if you're using Spotify or the Apple Podcast app, the follow key, so that next week's episode is downloaded for free. And of course, this is a listener-supported show, and we've got all kinds of ways that you can show your love and support for the show. Just go out to our support page at aviationnewstalk.com/support, where you'll find links to support the show via Patreon, PayPal, Venmo, and Zelle. And when you make a donation, I'll read your name on the show. Coming up on the news for the week of July 22nd, 2024, air traffic controllers will be getting more sleep. The Bob Hoover Academy gets a nice donation. And we'll tell you why a pilot who nearly caused a mid-air collision said that he doesn't need a pilot certificate. All this and more, and the news starts now. From FAA.gov, FAA and NATCA reach an agreement to address controller fatigue. On Wednesday, the FAA announced agreement with NATCA to ensure air traffic controllers receive adequate rest between shifts and can continue to safely do their work. The agreement will enable the implementation of long-term systematic changes following the identified opportunities in the report from a panel of experts. FAA Administrator Mike Whitaker said, "The science is clear that controller fatigue is a public safety issue and must be addressed. Today, after collaborating with NATCA, we're pleased to announce important progress for the flying public on the issue of fatigue." And the agreement says that controllers will now receive 10 hours off between shifts and 12 hours off before and after a midnight shift. So they're going to get an extra hour or two of sleep, which is good. From AOPA.org, Aspen Avionics to add engine monitoring to its Evolution MFDs. Aspen is teaming up with Electronics International to develop engine monitoring for Aspen's Evolution MFDs. The software-based upgrade will be available for 4- and 6-cylinder single-engine piston aircraft. The engine monitoring feature, expected to be available mid-2025, will display critical engine data on Aspen's Evolution MFD 500 MAX and MFD 1000 MAX MFDs. The new software will enable Aspen displays to pair with the EDC-33P engine data converter and sensors from EI, and allow owners to remove old primary engine instruments such as RPM, manifold pressure, exhaust and cylinder head temperature, fuel level, oil temperature and pressure, electrical current, fuel low, fuel pressure, and turbine inlet temperature gauges. And Aspen is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. Congratulations to them. From generalaviationnews.com, Dynon unveils safety-enhancing features. The new emergency glide feature for the Skyview HDX and AF 5000/6000 systems is designed to help reduce workload in a situation where pilots are easily overwhelmed. Emergency glide is activated when a pilot presses and holds the nearest button. This immediately engages the autopilot at a pre-programmed best glide speed. Simultaneously, Skyview HDX will locate the nearest airport within gliding distance, considering both wind and terrain. If the system finds a suitable airport, Skyview HDX will command the autopilot to navigate the aircraft to the airport. At the same time, the airport identifier is loaded into the comm radio, making all available comm radio frequencies for that airport available at the touch of a button. As the aircraft arrives at the airport, the autopilot initiates a banked turn to circle the airport while alerting the pilot to take control of the aircraft. From flyingmag.com, donation to expand Bob Hoover Academy fleet. The Bob Hoover Academy will receive 3 Cubcrafters EX2 Carbon Cub Kit airplanes over the next 3 years for its students to build, thanks to a donation by the Thomas and Stacy Siebel Foundation. The Salinas, California-based aviation nonprofit focuses on inspiring at-risk youth to engage in STEM activities. The program has a Cessna 152 and a Redbird Flight Simulations FMX AATD, which allows students to pursue a private pilot certificate. The foundation's $1.5 million donation funded by Tom Siebel, Craig McCaw, and David Lucian also includes operational support for the aircraft and guaranteed job interviews for program graduates with industry partners Cirrus, Cub Crafters, and Game Composites. Siebel said in a statement, this donation is about providing hope and tangible opportunities for a better future. Salinas is a city where many young people face daunting challenges daily. He said, we're honored to support the Bob Hoover Academy led by impassioned aviator Sean D. Tucker. They are changing lives through the magic of aviation combined with a solid education. And you may recall that we talked about the Bob Hoover Academy 2 years ago on episode 247 when we had Sean D. Tucker on the show. From KFIZ.com, 2 dead after plane crashes near EAA. Authorities say 2 people are dead following a plane crash near AirVenture. It happened Monday afternoon in a farm field about 1 mile south of the EAA campgrounds. Responders discovered the plane was engulfed in fire. The plane was a Lancair ES, which is a fixed-gear, lesser horsepower version of the Lancair 4. According to flight history, the plane left from a New Jersey airport early in the day. In 2023, 4 people were killed and 2 others injured during 2 different aircraft incidents related to AirVenture. Now, I've looked at the data on Flight Radar 24 and listened to the ATClive.net data. The aircraft was on a base leg to runway 36 left and was instructed to follow a flight of 2, which was on a right base to the runway. The Lancair reported those aircraft in sight. It had started its turn to final, and here are the last 2 data points, which I've corrected the altitudes for local barometric pressure. The aircraft was at 1,000 feet MSL and 86 knots, and then the following data point shows it 100 feet higher at 1,100 feet and 56 knot ground speed. Winds at the time were calm, so the ground speed would have been fairly close to its true airspeed. Now, the field elevation at Oshkosh is 818 feet. The crash site was about 1.1 miles from the threshold, so you'd expect the aircraft to be a little over 300 feet above the ground to be on a 3-degree glide slope. It appears this aircraft noticed that it was low, about 200 feet above the ground, pulled up to get closer to 300 feet above the ground, but didn't add sufficient power and got slow. And of course, we've talked so much in the past about how many of these crashes occur on the base to final turn. From FlyingMag.com, Boom unveils supersonic overture flight deck. Boom Supersonic, the developer of a supersonic passenger airline that has attracted the interest of United Airlines and American, on Tuesday gave a pair of key updates on its flagship Overture aircraft and Symphony engine. Boom unveiled Overture's state-of-the-art flight deck, which runs on Honeywell's Anthem avionics suite, which is also the system of choice for eVTOL aircraft manufacturers Lilium and Vertical Aerospace. According to Boom, it will be the first airliner to feature force feedback side sticks, which give pilots a physical response to the aircraft's movement, as well as inputs made by the co-pilot or autopilot. Like something out of a science fiction movie, Overture pilots will don augmented reality goggles during takeoff and landing. The headset, built by Universal Avionics, uses multiple cameras and sensors to fill any gaps in the pilot's vision. Boom says this is intended to eliminate the droop nose configuration seen on aircraft such as Concorde, the only successful supersonic airliner in history. The views seen through the goggles will also appear on the flight display, and an auto-landing system will assist pilots on the way down. And if you want to hear more about the Anthem Glass Cockpit, check out episode 209 when we interviewed product manager Jason Bialik about that system. From Lookout.co, Joby Aviation Academy gets Watsonville OK. Joby Aviation has secured a spot for its pilot and aircraft maintenance training programs. The Santa Cruz-based company previously received a $1 billion grant from the FAA to develop courses aimed at increasing access to aviation careers. Last week, the Watsonville City Council approved the company's 3-year lease for a hangar at Watsonville Airport. The Joby Aviation Academy will be the company's first aviation college and the 4th flight school at the airport. From avweb.com, FAA investigation continues into Southwest low-altitude alert at Tampa. The FAA continues to investigate a Southwest Airlines flight that descended to within 150 feet of the surface, some 4 miles from the end of the runway at Tampa International. At that point in the GPS approach, the aircraft should have been at about 1,600 feet. There was convective weather in the area, and a previous flight reported that the worst was about 7 miles out on the final approach to 7,000-foot-long runway 10. While flying its approach, the crew of Southwest Flight 425 descended from about 8,000 feet to near the surface in about 7 minutes at a steady rate of approximately 1,000 feet per minute. The tower controller issued a low-altitude alert in a calm voice, and the crew responded. About 50 seconds later, the tower asked if the flight was going around. The crew responded they were. The Boeing 737 landed safely at Fort Lauderdale International about 40 minutes later. After some time on the ground, the aircraft returned to Tampa. And in a related report from aircraft-technology.com, Southwest under FAA audit after series of safety incidents. Southwest is facing an audit from the FAA after several close-call incidents involving its aircraft in recent months. The low-cost carrier confirmed that the regulator has stepped up its investigation into the airline's safety record shortly after a Southwest aircraft came within 150 feet of the ocean while flying in poor weather in Florida. Southwest revealed it was also beginning internal analysis of its safety procedures following the incidents. The July 14th incident in Tampa appears to have been one close call too many for the FAA after the regulator had already begun multiple investigations into Southwest aircraft incidents, such as a Dutch roll incident in May and takeoff from a closed runway in June. And in Hawaii, another aircraft came within just 400 feet away from the ocean following a botched missed approach. And there was also an incident that we haven't talked about that occurred perhaps 6 months ago at LaGuardia Airport, where a Southwest aircraft was considerably off the final approach course and was headed toward the tower before they were told to go around. In that case, there was also poor weather again. Following the news of the FAA's audit, the Southwest Airline Pilots Association sent a memo to members saying that pilots working for the airline should expect an increased presence from the regulator, including checks from inspectors during training exercises. And finally, from ADN.com, Palmer, Alaska man who almost caused midair said he was a free citizen who didn't need a pilot certificate or aircraft registration. Prosecutors have now filed aviation-related criminal charges against the man. He was arrested in Palmer and jailed on federal charges of operating a plane without a license, operating an unregistered aircraft, and operating a plane displaying a false registration mark. Each of the 3 charges could bring up to 3 years in prison and hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential fines if he's found guilty. The government is also trying to seize his airplane, a Piper Cherokee, through a forfeiture process. The pilot and his wife owned and operated a commercial aviation business. He's 56 and has no other criminal record in Alaska. According to court filings, he ascribes to beliefs connected to the sovereign citizens movement, an ideology whose adherents say they are not subject to U.S. government's authority and whose members often employ perceived loopholes to try evading laws around everything from taxes to driver's licenses. Courts have repeatedly ruled against sovereign citizen legal arguments. In 2020, the charges say the pilot failed to renew his medical. In June 2022, he sent a letter to the FAA asking to cancel his aircraft's registration. He continued to fly without a license or plane registration, according to prosecutors. A year later, in June 2023, the pilot allegedly took off from the Palmer Municipal Airport without announcing his plans by radio and against the flow of traffic, nearly causing a midair collision with a plane trying to land. A judge ordered his release on Tuesday under the conditions that he surrendered his airplane and not operate an aircraft. We'll see how well that goes. Coming up next, a few of my updates, and then later you'll hear our conversation with Carl Valeri, all right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And now let's get to the good news from Patreon supporter Richard Green. He says, "Good news, Max. Yesterday I passed the commercial single-engine land practical exam." He says the multi-engine is next and perhaps a career change to Part 135. So, Richard, good luck with that and congratulations. And also congratulations to Michael Rose, who writes, "I passed my commercial today. Mega supporter John Weisswasser was the CFII who trained me and signed me off. And I credit your podcast, especially episode 149 with Jason Blair, with helping me prepare for the test. As always, thanks for all you do." Well, congratulations to you as well, Michael. And now for our new Video of the Week segment. This comes from foxnews.com. It's a video out of Argentina. And a Piper PA-18 there had to land on a frozen lagoon in the province of Chubut back in June due to technical problems. And then they brought in a helicopter to pull out that aircraft. So it's a really interesting video of watching the people prepare that aircraft to be picked up by the helicopter. And as the helicopter takes off, there's a bit of a whiteout as it sends snow everywhere from on top of the glacier. So check that out. We'll have that in our show notes, which you can find at aviationnewstalk.com/340. And let me mention that there were 2 fatal GA accidents this week, which I plan to talk about in a pair of future episodes. One was the crash of a Beech A36 Bonanza that crashed shortly after takeoff from MacArthur Airport in Long Island. And the other was the crash of a Cirrus SR-22 that occurred today in Bar Harbor, Maine, about noontime, while flying an ILS approach to the airport when the weather was near minimums. Unfortunately, both accidents were fatal, and I want to extend condolences to the families of the pilots and passengers on board these aircraft. And late breaking news, this comes from AOPA.org. VIP TFRs are being expanded. It says after the events in Butler, PA on July 13th, the U.S. Secret Service has asked for changes to temporary flight restrictions surrounding the vice president and presidential nominees from each political party. It says typically these VIP TFRs were 3-mile radius and 3,000 feet high. The new VIP TFRs are now 5-mile radius and 5,000 feet high. And the article shows 2 of these new larger TFRs over the Palm Beach Airport and over Mar-a-Lago, and they go right up to the northern boundary of the Palm Beach County Airport in Lantana. So it looks like when those TFRs are in effect, there won't be any approaches to that airport from the north. All takeoff and landing patterns will have to be to the south of the airport, which will probably reduce the volume that the airport can handle. And here's information about a new video series. Also from AOPA, their Air Safety Institute is collaborating with Sporty's Pilot Shop. They've just released the 3rd of 5 videos in their Taming the Twin series that provides what they call a unique perspective on how to safely operate a multi-engine aircraft. The latest video covers a typical multi-engine takeoff briefing and reviews single-engine performance charts that help with critical pre-flight calculations, such as accelerate stop distance and climb performance with one engine inoperative. And of course, there will be a link to that in the show notes. And there was yet another jet runway excursion incident this week, this time in Telluride, Colorado. I first learned of it from a Facebook post since deleted that went into great detail discussing the incident as a circle-to-land accident. Turns out, though, it was actually a takeoff accident. Now, oddly, there's been virtually no mention of this incident in the press. The Facebook post showed the jet stuck in the EMAS at the end of the runway. And according to flightsafety.org, a Hawker 900XP jet, November 526 Fox Charlie, sustained substantial damage when it was involved in a runway overrun during an attempt to abort takeoff on runway 9, which is a little over 7,000 feet long, at the Telluride Regional Airport, that's KTEX in Telluride, Colorado. Control was lost and the aircraft came to rest on the edge of the EMAS, or Engineered Materials Arrestor System. The airplane sustained extensive damage to the underside of the fuselage and at least one of the wings. So essentially, during an aborted takeoff, this aircraft ran off the end of the runway. And my guess is that this aircraft may fly again, as it appears that the damage was mostly to the landing gear and to the underbelly as it cut a path into the EMAS, which is kind of like soft concrete that breaks up as you go into it. And it's usually installed where there might be a steep drop-off and prevents an aircraft from going down a cliff or things like that. Now, had the FAA not installed EMAS, this aircraft would be completely off the runway and certainly would have been more severely damaged. And by the way, I'm not sure I mentioned this before, but if you're using the Apple Podcast app, Apple now provides automatic transcripts for the show. So if you're looking for something in a hurry, you sometimes may find it faster to look for something in the transcript rather than to listening to an entire episode. Though, of course, don't do that while you're driving. And congratulations to Cirrus Aircraft, which announced that they have just shipped their 10,000th piston aircraft in their SR series. Now, that doesn't include the many hundreds of Vision jets that they have also sold, so congratulations to them. And this is the first podcast that I'm recording while standing up. Yet I realize that I sit so much, sometimes a couple days at a time, while preparing these episodes. So I got what's called a desk riser for a few $100s from Amazon. I'll include a link to it in the show notes so you can see what it looks like. But essentially, it's got a shelf an electric motor, and I put my monitors on top of it and my keyboard on a lower shelf. And then the whole thing will raise up about, 18 inches, something like that. And so when I'm standing, I'm looking at the monitor, and I can also use the motor to run it down to the lower level where I can also work sitting down if I want. So just thought you'd be interested in that, especially if you find that you sit too much, as I do. And if you've been listening to the show for a while, I'd like to invite you to become a supporter of the show. There are lots of ways to support the show. You can go out to the app that you're using and post a nice 5-star review telling other folks about what you think of the show. And of course, some supporters support the show financially. If you find value in the show and occasionally hear things that make you a safer pilot or might even someday save a life, I'd like to invite you to support the show. And it's so easy to become a supporter. It takes you just a couple of minutes. My recommendation is you stop what you're doing now, because this will take only a couple of minutes. Just head out to aviationnewstalk.com/support, where you'll see different options for signing up to support the show. Thanks so very much for your support. And now see if you know these people who've signed up in the past week to help support the show. My thanks to Mike Borch, who's made a one-time donation just as he did a year ago to help support the show, and he did that via PayPal. And also thanks to Jay Byram, who signed up to support the show on a monthly basis via PayPal. He writes, I just purchased 2 Zulu Delta headsets through the link on your website. I'm really looking forward to getting them and going back to the Lightspeed family. Love the show. Keep up the great work. I've also set up a monthly donation. I listened to your show for several years now and have finally gotten around to supporting the great work you do. Jay, thanks so very much. And it says that he's a commercial pilot. He's also got SIC ratings in the Learjet series and Learjet 60 as well. So hope you're having fun flying the right seat of the Learjet, Jay. And coming up next, our conversation with Carl Valeri, all right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And now let me tell you a little about Carl Valeri. He's an airline pilot who's been flying for over 35 years. Since 2003, he's been assisting pilots to find jobs and obtain interviews with airlines in the U.S. and throughout the world. He's also an aviation blogger, speaker, and podcaster. Now here's our conversation with Carl Valeri. Carl, welcome to the show. So great to have you back here.
Yo, Max, it's great to be here. It's been a while, and I'm so excited to talk about aviation careers.
Yeah, indeed. And that's why you're back. I know this has been an interesting year. Seems like the airlines have started to slow down a little bit. We're going to talk about all the different segments of the airlines and the people that are hiring pilots and so on. But let's start with the majors. What are some of the big external factors that are going on that are affecting the majors these days?
Sure, there are some large external factors and some minor ones. The biggest ones are supply chain issues, and supply chain issues on a couple of levels. Number one, you have some issues with Boeing, and Boeing is having some quality issues, which they're taking care of. I will say one thing, and this is something we'll talk about later for projections, is at least they kept manufacturing, and they're actually parking planes in the parking lot, which is amazing. So you have those issues. Then on the other side, you have Airbus. And why are we talking about Boeing and Airbus? Because those are the biggest single aisle airplanes out there, and those are the most sold. Well, on the Airbus side, there's these new aircraft, the 321, the Neo, and the 320 Neo. And the engines that they have there are made by Pratt Whitney. And those are those new gear turbofan engines. They're having a little problem with some of the powdered metal that's put into the manufacturing process within those engines. And what's happened is they've had to actually do re-inspections of those engines. Well, the good thing is that those actually inspections are actually at their peak right now. A lot of aircraft on ground. Well, there's about 500 aircraft engines and aircraft that are on ground right now because of those inspections worldwide. And that's really hurting the airlines, because if you don't have an airplane to fly, you can't fly passengers and you don't need pilots to fly them. So those are two of the really big factors that are going on right now. You also have some changes in the marketplace, and there's a lot of factors, but these are the big ones. There's changes in the marketplace where you actually have that premium leisure travel is actually doing well, where all that low-cost travel isn't doing as well, and that's because that part of the marketplace is getting hit pretty hard right now with the economy, the lower end, but the premium travel is doing very well. And we're seeing this in all different types of travel, whether it's private, business, or in the airlines. Whoever's in the premium travel and has lots of services, they're doing better, but we're seeing an overall slowdown in total flights because of those two big factors. Another big factor for the East Coast primarily is the air traffic control issues. What's that mean? There's been an actual really shortage for the past 2 years. Started about 2 years ago, they started asking airlines to start reducing flights in the New York area, even within the Washington, D.C. We're having problems on the Jacksonville area. That whole East Coast corridor, which there's a lot of flights there. So they asked them to reduce by 10%, especially like in the New York area. And they're now asking the airlines to do it again. So now they want us to reduce flights, the airlines to reduce flights. Well, less flights, less airplanes, less pilots, right? So it's really that simple in that regard. And then we go on to some other issues, and that's where getting the actual qualified pilots to come in from the regionals is another issue there. Those are the big factors. There's a lot of other little factors that are involved here. Also, looking at this from a worldwide perspective, your airlines that are doing better, like we're talking majors, are the ones that have networks overseas, because at this moment, we're seeing a huge increase in flights overseas. We're seeing a little bit of softness in certain markets, but there's a big increase from the U.S. overseas. So you're seeing those being the revenue accretive types of flights. And that's the biggest thing, is that you have this shortage of aircraft. Now, we had a shortage of pilots. That's not as much of an issue. It's still an issue in certain segments of the industry. For instance, there is not enough qualified pilots to become captains at the regionals. So if we can, back to the regionals, and we'll see that we're having a little bit of a struggle at certain regionals hiring captains because they don't have those qualifications. And usually you need about 1,000 hours in the airline operation, 121 operation. There's a mixture you can have, 135, won't go into that too much. But you can use some of your 135 or charter type operations over into the majors, and that'll qualify you as a captain. This happened to me back in 2003, where I could hold captain, but I wasn't qualified to hold captain because I didn't have 1,000 hours of 121 time. And you're seeing that happen often right now. So what's happening for the regionals is they're still backed up, but they're catching up, right? Because you're seeing a slowdown, so they're starting to catch up a little bit. So you have this backup of captains. So then there's less flying because they can't actually fly their flights at the regionals. So then the first officers aren't flying that are new, and they're not getting their time. So they can't get their time to be able to qualify as captains because they're flying less. So then they have to cut back flights, which makes them fly less and possibly furloughs them. So it's kind of this vicious cycle. And it's tough for somebody right now, and I know we're going to get into this, that's in this marketplace. But just remember, no matter what, always try as hard as you can to gain the experience you need to get to the next level. And this is something I just want to put out there to people, is try to get 1,000 hours of PIC turbine at some point. And people are going to look at me like, gosh, we haven't needed that for years. It doesn't matter. Is that should be a goal. And then try to get your 1,500 hours so you can qualify for a regional airline to get hired. And those are the kind of the little things, your ATP ratings. But as far as the shortage that we're looking at now, and I know that for those people that are in my group mastermind coaching, they've heard me talk about many other things, but those are kind of drilling down into some of the smaller items that we're looking at as far as issues. And those are the majors. You look at like the Delta, United, American, the Southwest Airlines, because remember, they actually are hiring the most pilots, mainly for that domestic feed and close-in international, and some international that's being able to be stretched because of the MAX. That market isn't as big as the other markets here that are close-in international and also domestic. So those are kind of the things that are hitting us right now as far as hiring is concerned. And one of the things that I think is really important, and I know we're going to talk again later, is to continue to fly. Do not stop flying. One of the things that really makes me sad is when someone says to me, listen, I'm going to quit flying and I'm going to wait till the market turns around again. Well, I know people have done that through 5 cycles, and they keep saying they're going to wait till it turns around again. It never will. Just continue to build your hours, because you'll need those hours no matter what. So just try to get as many hours as possible. And it's really that simple. I know it's hard for you to look at this right now, like a 2-year downturn, as seeming to be a very long time. Because if you're like 20, 25 years old, that seems like a long time. If you're in your 50s, like I am, it's not that long of a time, but it's hard to convince somebody of that, But if you look at it, think about how long it took you to get through college or through high school, et cetera. But yeah, those are some of the things that are impacting some of the airlines as far as, again, we're talking passengers and major airlines. Regional airlines, because of their feed issues, we've seen bankruptcies, you've seen layoffs, furloughs, and that type of thing. But basically, a furlough is a leave of absence. Normally, when we talk about it in the airline sense, it's usually an involuntary leave of absence. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, I went on a voluntary furlough. Well, the first thing the airlines do is they offer voluntary furloughs, so they don't have to furlough other people. And it's a wonderful thing because you have people that want to take time off, amazingly enough, and they'll take time off so that they can go do other things. It's amazing how many people have second jobs. But as far as the passenger airlines, we can talk a little, if you like, talk a little bit about private aviation and also cargo.
Yeah, let's get to those in a moment. I've got a number of different follow-up questions just based on some of the things that you've talked about. Let me go back to some of the first few things that you mentioned. You talked about supply chain. Obviously, you mentioned 500 airplanes on the ground, getting their engines inspected. That takes a lot of aircraft out of the fleet. We know that Boeing has been slow on deliveries. And if an airline wants more aircraft, suddenly they can't just rush over to Airbus because there's a 6-year backlog there. So that makes a lot of sense. If you're unable to get the airplanes you need, you're not going to need as many pilots. What about the ATC issue? My first thought would be, hey, if we can't fly into JFK or to New York, let's take those planes and fly them somewhere else to keep them busy. Is that not the case? Is that why that's impacting the pilot hiring?
So it is. And another thing to add to that, I'm glad you asked, is what they've done, air traffic control has done, is actually have shifted air traffic controllers around. And that's helped a little bit. The hiring has helped, but really that is a shift in a marketplace. And you're right. I mean, you can shift flying, but just so much, which, by the way, is another thing that a lot of airlines are doing, is they're actually shifting to different marketplaces that make money. You see routes that haven't made money for airlines for decades, and now they're cutting those routes. And it makes sense. I mean, I was just listening to the CEO of United Airlines talking about that, how some of these just don't make sense that we're doing this. But as far as air traffic control is concerned, yeah, you're basically going to reallocate those flights. And they've come up with some great ideas, right? You see, especially the low-cost carriers coming up with new hubs, new areas. I mean, there's some people that might say, well, you're just throwing good money after bad. Those aren't going to work out the same way. But you don't know. You don't know if that marketplace is going to be different. And it is different. I mean, there's a lot of it's going to South America. Caribbean is doing really well. Certain parts of South America are doing well. So they're going to those revenue accretive markets, and that's really what's happening.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the upgrade process. You mentioned 1,000 hours. Let me know which hours that the first officer is sitting in the right seat to count toward that 1,000 hours. And then once they reach that, what is the process? Are there certain training courses? How many months does it take to accomplish that? Tell us all about the upgrade process.
Sure. That's a great question. So you need 1,000 hours of airline time, 121 time. And there is also a mix. You can use some of your hours that you were pilot in command under 135 in a passenger carrying capacity, right? But in general, most people get their 1,000 hours. Then they bid to become a captain. They usually will hold it, right? Because they're probably more senior than the ones that are already there, because a lot of them could qualify before even they came to the regional, because maybe they had past time, et cetera. Takes about 6 weeks to do an upgrade training. So in that training process, and this is what I do at the airlines, I do a lot of upgrade training. And one of the things that you do is you study before you get there. So it only takes 5 to 6 weeks to do your actual training in the simulator, in all your written exams and your oral exams. Now what do you have to do? Now we do this process of operating experience, or what people call OE. And that process can take a long time. Now, why is that? Because it's so busy, the upgrades are busy, and the changes are so busy that they don't have enough check airmen, because you have to fly with a check airman, and you have to pair them properly. So that's been a bit of a challenge. It's getting a little easier right now. There's some catch up that's happening at the airlines. So you fly with another pilot, a check pilot. It could take you, 40, 50, 60, 70 hours, and then you get a check ride done and you're done. You're off to the line. So that process, 5 weeks in the sim, the other part of the process they could get you through within the next 2 to 4 weeks, then you're done. The thing is, though, what's happened is during some of these slowdowns and some of these furloughs, some of the airlines have over furloughed instructors even, so they can't find check airmen. And so now you're having issues there, so that it could take you sometimes 6 months. I know when I did my upgrade, I started in April and I finished in November with the whole process, because in between I had all these other things that they decided to do with me. So not everybody gets through it as quickly as some others do. What happened to me, I went to training to be an instructor, and I went to 2 different types of training for different types of instructing. And so that's actually the reason it took me a while. But I was listening to people saying, gosh, it was taking me 6 months just to get my operating experience. And here's another thing. Say you don't get your operating experience within the time frame that's allocated. So now you got to go back to training again. So now the process becomes longer again. It really, it's such a catch-22. And that's kind of interesting how that happens. But in general, that's all you're doing, about 5 weeks training, get out online, do your OE, 2 to 4 weeks, you're done, you do your check ride. Total process, you're looking at 2 to 3 months and you can get done. You can get someone done in 2 to 3 months to become a captain.
Okay.
And that's if everything goes right.
Now, I want to come back to your 1,000 hours of turbine time. You didn't say whether single engine, twin engine, for example. I have tons of Vision Jet time.
Yeah.
My guess is maybe that's not as valuable.
Right. So I should have qualified that as 1,000 PIC turbojet multi. And that's what you're shooting for. Now, the turbine time's good. Don't get me wrong. What you have is great, because you know how a turbine engine flies and you know how a turbine aircraft flies, and you know how a turbine engine starts. So that's a big one up. But then there's the multi-engine time. How much multi-time does this person have? That type of thing. It's like turbine single engine. If you have like a propeller, if you turbine single engine propeller aircraft, that actually is not going to be as valuable as multi-engine turbine. But with all that said, you get as many hours as possible. And when you come in the door, here's what's interesting. You may actually have more challenges if you have multi-engine time in a piston than you may have if you have a single engine turbine time, you personally doing training. And this is kind of something I've noticed is in the training environment, is because of the fact that they haven't been in an airline operation, number one, and they don't understand turbine and turbine engines and the speeds. Everything is totally different there. But that's with everybody. Just remember this. A lot of the military pilots that I train coming from a C-130, those are a lot slower aircraft. I mean, they have some transition challenges, right? And their challenges are what we call gate to runway. Remember, in the military, they're not loading passengers. They're not putting the flight plan in like they would get from air traffic control, all these different changes. They don't know what gate holds are, push clearances, all these kind of things. They don't know that whole jargon, and they have to be trained in that too. So those are the kind of things that do take time, no matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're a military pilot or someone who's just came from a piston twin. But I will say one thing, though. The piston twin folks that are out there, or piston, they have a little bit more of a challenge because they're so used to dialing in a VOR and going to it, right? Not really programming an FMS, which is something you have as experience flying the Vision Jet.
Sure. So I'm going to tie two things here together. You mentioned a 2-year downturn, but I also want to ask you, I see behind you, there is a crystal ball. So I'm guessing the two are related. Tell me about the crystal ball, and then tell me where you came up with this 2-year downturn that you kind of wedged in there and didn't explain.
Yeah. So this crystal ball, we'll talk a little bit about that. But as far as people have always asked me, how is it that I'm able to predict the future? And that's one of the reasons a lot of people come on to our group coaching, is I always give my predictions. I don't do it on my show. And one of the things is that I follow the industry, but most importantly is I listen to the CEOs and I listen to what they're telling me. For instance, a good example is the Neo engines. Let's go back to that, right? How long is that going to take? It takes a good 200 to 300 days to actually do the inspection, right? There is another manufacturer or maintenance and repair and overhaul shop that's looking at bringing it down to 150. But if you look at the long process there and how many planes have to be done, it's going to take a good couple years to do that. And also all these other issues that we're having with Boeing, and Boeing has some airplanes backed up. But as far as estimating how long all these things are going to take to put in place, it's going to take a couple of years there. So that's how I do that. And looking at GDP growth, either both nationally and internationally. And again, those are estimates. They can change. So people ask me how I'm able to predict that. Well, I told them I just read a lot, I research, I listen to CEOs, but the one thing I'm missing is I don't have a crystal ball. Well, one day I'm in an antique shop, and lo and behold, I'm pointing at something here. For those listening can't see it. Behind me is a real crystal ball. And as you can tell, it's sagging. The shelf is sagging a little bit. So that's a solid piece of crystal. And I looked at it and I said, you know what? If I buy that, I don't have the excuse that I don't have a crystal ball anymore. So I actually put it out there. I started looking into it and talking to it. And you know what? It'll let me tell the future, but only of aviation and aviation careers. So I can't give you stock tips on anything other than aviation. So that's the story behind the crystal ball. I now can say I have a crystal ball. So not only do I do analysis and that I interview like CEOs of different companies and all, and do send out emails, I also now have a crystal ball I can look into. It's really a joke because in reality, that keeps you humble, the crystal ball, because you make yourself realize no matter how much you estimate and how good you are. I'm pretty good. About 90% of the time I'm right. There are times you're not right because there's luck involved. And if you believe in crystal balls, you also believe in luck.
Got it. Well, the best thing about this crystal ball is it's changing colors. So it's rather amusing as I'm watching it sitting behind you go from green to light blue to purple and so on. So
it's a living crystal ball.
I'll keep that in mind. Hey, let's talk a little bit about each of the four majors. Tell us what's going on with them individually. Who is still hiring? Who's stopped hiring? What does your crystal ball tell us about each of the four majors?
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, again, it's just, if I tell you something today, it's going to be different tomorrow because people make announcements. And we're talking more like the United, Delta, American, Southwest is what those are the major players out there. And those are the guys that are talking about hiring. So let's talk about hiring and what they mean by hiring. So some airlines say that they're hiring, but in reality, they're hiring maybe into a pool. They're hiring into different programs, meaning they're not really hiring pilots into their operations. So you do see that happening. So what I want to talk about first is people that are actually hiring people into their operations. So you see people like a United Airlines who's actually said they had a pause right now on hiring, but that's coming back again, right? So that pause is just for 2 months, and they're going to start hiring again, and that's coming back. You see a Delta. Delta is still doing some hiring. So you look at those are the big ones. You're looking at an American Airlines that says they're hiring even though they haven't brought anybody on. And this all goes up month to month. So there's been hiring, but there's been pauses. So what we're seeing that's different is we're not seeing we're not hiring, period. We're seeing pauses in hiring. And the airlines have gotten smart because they're putting people into these pools. The other part of that, going back to the hiring, you're seeing a lot of people hiring into these cadet programs. So that's part of some of the numbers. So you have to weed out the numbers of the ones going to the cadet program. So I'm not counting the cadet programs, but getting you hired into a cadet program is great. I know some of you out there might say, hey, wait a minute, what happened? Like Frontier Airlines, they're canceling some of those classes, pushing them out, and maybe pushing them out far enough that I'm no longer eligible to be hired there. There's a good example of you're hired, but you're not actually flying at the airline yet. So are you hired by the airline? Yeah, but it's called a conditional job offer. If you get hired and Delta says, you're hired, you're coming to work for us, it's a conditional job offer. It's conditional upon you passing actually your check ride. So you have to make it through all that. So as far as going back to it, yes, there are airlines hiring right now. United has been put on a pause. They're going to re-up that soon. You're seeing some pausing also at some of the big cargos. I know you didn't ask that, but the big cargo carriers are also pausing, like the FedExes and the UPSs. If you're looking for a job right now, I'd be applying at the Uniteds and the Deltas and the Americans. I'd still be putting the applications in there, and the Southwest. Southwest has a lot of hiring I think it's going to start ramping up again, even though there is nothing happening right now, but it's going to be ramping up in the future again. So I'm very hopeful, especially with this MAX issue. Again, going back to Boeing, they did the right thing. They kept manufacturing knowing they were going to get through this issue. So I think that was smart. It really was. So you brought up cargo. Let's talk about that. What's the macro picture? What's going on affecting demand for the cargo airlines? And just scale it for us, if you will. If you think about the majors and you think about the cargo airlines, what percentage of the pilots are in each of those two different areas? Yeah. So if you're looking at the cargo airlines as far as hiring is concerned, right now it's not great. Now, why is that from a macro standpoint? You're looking at a lot more nearshoring in manufacturing, and also you're seeing a lot more ground transportation and more close in transportation that's happening. Because remember, this is a transportation business, cargo, right? So you don't have to just use airplanes. You can use cargo, you can use trucks, LTL, that type of thing. So you're seeing more of that happening. You're seeing more flights that are close in between like Mexico and the US. You're seeing that happening. So you're seeing some of this nearshoring and close in manufacturing affecting the cargo flying. Even the cargo business is starting to, grow a little bit. It's not doing that great. You're seeing less people buying from Amazon, right? So you're seeing more people go to the store. So that's already affected the cargo. So that's more of a macro side of things, and I'm kind of glossing over it a little bit, not giving you hard numbers. But you are seeing this drop in the actual air cargo going more to the ground cargo in certain situations. Much smaller environment as far as cargo hiring is concerned. As far as the actual hiring of people, numbers-wise, in comparison to like a major airline hiring in this, and we're just talking over the past year or so, we're looking at numbers around 2 to 3% comparison right now. As far as hiring now, as far as the number of pilots, it's a lot smaller because there are, and we're talking just U.S., right? So there's a lot smaller of an actual hiring into the cargo realm because there's not quite as many pilots in the cargo world. What's been really cool is the growth of the airlines, right? And the passenger airlines. I think that's exciting. The fact that we're seeing, we're going to have manufacturing up. I mean, they're looking at what Boeing's talking about 44,000 new airplanes, 20-some thousand of those are brand new airplanes, not replacements. I mean, that's pretty darn amazing, but that's more for the passenger side of things. Cargo has been something that if you don't follow the whole cargo industry, and that's kind of something I did in the past, doing some international trade, you kind of might get lost in the weeds there. Because remember, the flying portion of it, it's not quite as large. As far as percentage-wise, as far as hiring, you're looking at much smaller percentages, and it's about the 2 to 3%, but that's in the current hiring environment.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was that small. I know that when things were really going fast, people were getting hired at exactly 1,500 hours. Is that still the case today, or have the numbers moved up a little bit?
Yeah, so you're still seeing some people get hired at 1,500 hours, but it is moving up. You're going back to the days of a preferential of 1,000 PIC turbine and 3,000 total time. That's always been the case out there. That's not happening, though. I mean, they can't find people even at those numbers. But you're still starting to see those numbers creep up, which is great. As a matter of fact, a good example is the airlines used to look for people that they were eligible for the restricted ATP, and they would help you get your restricted ATP, or you had the restricted already, and they would do your ATP check ride for you. Now, you see airlines like majors, especially, like, what is a restricted ATP? They don't know what it is. I mean, I sat in a meeting the other day and it was amazing. And everybody in the room was like, does anybody know what this is? And think about that. They were starting to think about using the restricted ATP, but that's gone away because the majors have always been able to get as many people as they need. As far as a shortage of actual qualified pilots, when we talk about that, that's over time, and because it takes a long time to make a pilot. So yeah, that actually is happening, the 1,500 hours, but nowhere near like it used to be. And if you're getting hired with 1,500 hours, you better be special. And the other thing too, and this is something that I'm seeing a huge trend in lately, is the people now realize things are going to be tough, right? So they're very appreciative in the interview. It comes across in your body language, in your language, in your tonality, when you feel like you're not entitled to that, when you feel like you really want this job. And if you look at some of the other past people that have been through the time when it was 1,500 hours, sometimes they still have that attitude like, well, I remember when I could get a job with 1,500 hours. Well, that was yesterday, and now we need to move in the future. So always remember, try to keep going towards the future. And this isn't the first time this has happened. I mean, we saw people getting hired by Continental Airlines at 23 years old and just barely having ATP minimums. But yeah, the days of 250 hours are over, but that's been over for a while.
What about the low-cost carriers? Are they doing much hiring at all, or are they pretty much closed the door on hiring?
So again, you have to weed out what people say. Now, when I say I listen to CEOs and I like to send emails and ask questions, there's sometimes you have to filter some comments because they're competing with some of the ultra low-cost carriers. They are having a lot of issues because an ultra low-cost carrier means that their costs need to be low, right? And they're not necessarily passing all those savings to you. They're making money based on all these other additive features that they have. So what else do they have? A Coke, different things. They don't have much else on board on an ultra low cost carrier. The shift we're seeing is that more services and different seating arrangements are happening at the ultra low cost carriers, but they're really getting hit hard because it's a commodity at that point. Whereas you don't have the big network and you don't have, all those different points programs, et cetera. But yeah, to answer your question, that has actually really come to almost a screeching halt at the low cost carriers. Now there are some, again, that you think are ultra low cost, but they're really kind of like a boutique types of airlines that are out there, and they have specialized routes and they're doing well, but only in that market that they're in. But there's just a limited type of market for that, especially when it comes to revenue. For instance, I'm in Lakeland, Florida, and you fly to Green Bay, Wisconsin. How much of that are you going to really see? Whereas somebody going from Tampa to JFK onto Europe, you're going to see a lot because you have a large marketplace that you can go towards on that. So it's pretty interesting how things are happening. And there's a lot of inelasticity of demand, as they say. Let's kind of define that. The price, right? They're going to fly either way, right? If you dump more into the market, you're still going to have a similar amount of demand. So if you keep dumping more into the marketplace, you have more supply, which means it's going to drive the price down. And we're seeing that happening with a lot of the low-cost carriers. They're redefining themselves. One thing about this industry, it's always going to change.
That for sure. That's part of what makes it fun and kind of entertaining and interesting.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit more about the regionals. If you would, talk about each of them in terms of the hiring that they've been doing and how it may have changed in recent months.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really something that is really exciting, is that you're seeing still some hiring at the regionals because of the fact that they're still bringing people on at certain places because they need them, but it really has slowed down. But I would look at the quality carriers that have larger networks and have really good balance sheets. I'll call one out because I'm going to say something positive about them. SkyWest Airlines is a great example. They have an incredible balance sheet. If you remember, during the pandemic, they were buying airplanes from United and saying, listen, we're going to fly those airplanes if we buy them from you. So they kind of guaranteed their success there in a certain manner. So look at those type of airlines and look at those airlines with large networks. Also, when you're looking at some of these airlines, look at their ties to a major airline, if they're wholly owned or not. Sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't, because remember this, they can sell that airline off in a heartbeat. And you saw this happen after 9/11. The wholly owned airlines were sold off, and some have come back in. But a good example is Continental. Continental had a regional airline. There was no difference, right? Then they spun it off to this thing called Continental Express or ExpressJet. That's just one example. That can happen anywhere. So we're kind of seeing that, and there's certain airlines that there are having some challenges. Again, I love them all. I would go towards some of those that have a stronger balance sheet. And how do you find that out? By the way, here's some advice. Go check out the investor page on any of these companies and follow the investor page. That's all I do all day. I mean, I try to listen to somebody talking, some CEO, a CFO, COO talking about their operations. You can do the same. It's kind of boring to most people, but it's really interesting. So,
sure. That's great. Well, let's go ahead and transition to a couple of other things. Tell us about the scholarships that you let people know about and about group coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and thanks for letting me talk about that, because that's actually my passion project. And I started this years ago with the scholarships guide. And I think I've told you this story, is that I couldn't find any scholarships for people. And the person that would have a scholarships guide wasn't doing it anymore. So my mom, she helped me put this together. And she actually used to help people get into college. and help write their, cover letters and resumes and applications and stuff like that. So she helped me put that together. In the beginning, we only had about 60,000. And right before we published it, every day we had to change it. And right before we published it, it was like weeks before my mom passed away. And so I remember her always telling me that it was never good enough. Now, this was many years ago, almost 10 years now. And I still am chasing that ghost of her saying it's never good enough. Now we're up to well over $120 million in the scholarships guide. It's over 1,400 pages long. And what I was doing is I was putting this together so that people could find these scholarships. People tell me they can't find money. It's in there. There's Women in Aviation and NGPA. There's the Black Pilots Association, the Latino Pilots Association, the Jewish Pilots Association. That scholarships guide has really been making a difference in people's lives. And I kind of wish my mom could have seen it, because it's amazing when people come to me and say, hey, look, I got this scholarship. So the scholarships guide is only $10. But here's my other mission that I'm on, is I want everybody to get one for free. So I started this thing called the Pay It Forward program. So all of our sponsors and all the ad revenue we get goes towards actually giving away scholarships guides. So for just $10, people actually can sponsor it. We usually ask our true sponsors to give away at least 50 scholarships guides in their name. And to find one of those, by the way, for all of your listeners, you can get one for free, aviationcareerspodcast.com/free. And you can see the list of our sponsors that are giving them away. You can almost always find one for free. And my biggest advice on this scholarships guide, and this is the one thing people make the biggest mistake on, is they don't apply, number one. Number two, they give up. They look at the title and they give up. I'll give you an example. If you have a scholarship that says it's for like the Jewish Pilots Association, and you're not Jewish, it doesn't mean you can't apply. Take a look at the requirements, because it might say preferentially you're of Jewish descent, but we are going to give it to somebody. And a good example is I had someone who got the Arthur Godfrey Scholarship, and the other person that got that scholarship didn't want it, got double scholarship for that Arthur Godfrey Scholarship. And it happens all the time. And some people get scholarships, they don't want them, they don't need them, they just want to put it on their resume. So again, it's easy to find. It's aviationcareerspodcast.com scholarships, and it's only $10. And you can get one for free. And we have a thing called the Pay It Forward program, if people are interested in that, where they can actually give away for those scholarships for free. Another thing I do is career coaching. I've been doing that since 2003. And that's where I do interview prep, and I do a lot of career changing. People are trying to figure out if they want to go into the career. I have Zoom meetings like this online. We'll have the parents on. Most of my clients are changing careers. They've retired. They're looking for something new. They're 65. They still want to be able to make money in aviation. You can make money in aviation at 65. There were one-on-one coaching. I got so busy that I wanted something that I could give to everybody. So I started this group coaching mastermind. And that's where we try to inspire and inform and actually work in a collaborative manner. And that's why I call it a mastermind. I'll do an inspirational story in the beginning. I inform people. That's where I do my updates on the industry updates. And like I said, I don't do that online. The reason I do that, it's a very safe space so that you can ask questions without all the ridicule that you get online. Because, if you put something on YouTube or online, there's a lot of people that answer in not the nicest manner. So this gives you that opportunity to ask those questions in a safe environment. If somebody says something that berates somebody else, we throw them out. The only people can give positive feedback. And then I talk about a topic, and then the next thing we do is a Q&A. And that's been a blessing. That's been the most fun I've had, actually, has been doing this. The career, it's only $20 a month, and they can actually get the first month free with a coupon code Coach It Forward. But that actually has been a passion project of mine also. And it's moving the target, because a lot of people, they really don't want that one-on-one coaching every single month. They just want a little bit of advice. They want to see where things are. They want to know, am I doing the right thing? And that's where, this is great, because you don't have to go to TikTok to find out if I'm getting hired or not. You can just come here and talk to other people just like you, and they can replay those coaching sessions afterwards. So those are my two big projects. And that's what I do on my days off, because a lot of people know I only work about 12 days a month as an airline pilot, and I just sit here all day and do this, and I absolutely love it. That's where I get into a little more detail on things. If you notice when he started asking me, or when you started, asked me about the the regionals, I there's certain things I can't talk about, in the public realm, but I can do on a more private realm. And that's why we do the one-on-one. By the way, the one-on-one coaching is really important because I help a lot of people with medical issues and legal issues, arrests, can't get their medical. We can't do that in a group coaching session. We can talk in generalities, but you really need to talk to somebody one-on-one for things like that. So there's certain things, be careful about putting out online. That's for sure. So anyway, well, thanks for letting me talk about those two things. Because those are two things I'm obviously very passionate about is the coaching and helping people and the scholarships. And, people say, why are you doing this? It'd be better just go out and fly a trip. You can make so much more money. It's like, well, this is just my way of giving back to society. I mean, after a while, you have enough money, you want to do something that makes a difference. And I tell you what, someone told me this a long time ago, and it's very true. If you fill other people's buckets, your bucket's going to overflow. And that's kind of what we're doing here with this, is just filling people's buckets.
I like that. Well, I know that a lot of people, when they're looking for coaching or advice, they're probably unwilling to shell out some money, and they may look for free advice online, whether they're getting it from TikTok or things like that. What are your thoughts about getting your career advice from those places?
So there is some good information out there. I will say that. Just go out there and verify them and see what they're doing. And, a lot of people say, are they selling me something? See what the track record is of that person, because there are some people that truly want to help. But a lot of times people, they just want to make money online, right? Or they want to become famous on whatever, YouTube or TikTok, that kind of thing. I would say, go talk to somebody that has your best interests in mind, isn't just, somebody trying to sell you something. And that's sometimes hard to find out. You just look at people with a track record. Listen to people that have been around for a while. I mean, look at Max. I mean, your podcast here, I think people actually listen to it because you have some integrity and you have a product here, this podcast, that's giving people good information. And that's what you look for. You can find people online. Just watch who you're listening to. But I wouldn't say TikTok's totally bad, but there are so many people out there saying things like, it's like the financial stuff, right? Somebody says, oh, buy Bitcoin. Look how much money I made on Bitcoin. You should put all your money in Bitcoin. That's bad advice, by the way. Don't take that advice. So you see those kind of things happening. But kudos to TikTok for one thing, and YouTube, that people are sharing their life flying, and people are starting to understand what it's like to fly. And I think that's really cool that people get to see the inside world of aviation.
Carl, where do people find out more about you and your podcast and your coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. It's aviationcareerspodcast.com. And you can click on coaching on the side. It'll even describe how you can get 1 month free for the coaching mastermind. And you can actually look at all the past mastermind groups. We actually have all of them recorded so you can watch them. And just go to aviationcareerspodcast.com and look at the scholarships. And I highly recommend checking it out because it might inspire you to move forward in your career. And I also highly recommend looking at all the different things online and watching all the different YouTube channels and podcasts like yours. I think there's so many people out there that want to help you. And usually after you're watching for a long time, you can figure out who those people are. So give them some time and try to verify who they are. And someone like Max, is someone you should listen to.
Thanks so much for joining us here today, Carl.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me. And this has been absolutely terrific, Max. And I can't wait to see you again at the next air show or in the next podcast.
And my thanks to Carl for joining us here today. Funny little thing came out of our conversation before we started the show. He mentioned that he used to live in New Jersey, and I said, I used to live in New Jersey, and I said, I used to live in Bud Lake, and he said, oh, I used to live in Bud Lake as well. And it turns out we both lived in the Village Green apartments, which are off Highway 46 in Bud Lake, New Jersey. I lived there for a couple years in the early 80s. He lived there in the late 1980s, so pretty funny coincidence. Anyway, you can find more about Carl and his Aviation Careers podcast at aviationcareerspodcast.com. And just a reminder that I love hearing from you, and I read many of your emails on the show. If you'd like to send me a message, just go out to aviationnewstalk.com, click on Contact at the top of the page. That's absolutely the best way to send me a message. And of course, I also want to thank everyone who supports the show in one of the following ways. We love it when you join the club and sign up at aviationnewstalk.com/awesome to support the show financially. You can also do that at aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. We also love it when you leave a 5-star review on whatever app that you're listening to us on now. But most importantly, please tell one or more of your friends about the show. That's the primary way that we grow the show. So please let your friends know about Aviation News Talk. And of course, if you're in the market for a headset, please consider buying a Lightspeed headset and using one of the links in our show notes, because if you use those links, they will donate to help support the show. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up. And remember that you can always go around.
You can always go around. If it don't look right coming down, don't wait until your side's baby sliding upside down.